Should we have a roll?
Sure. Tony Terragini.
Here.
Ann Harrigan.
Here.
Faith Ham. Here. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Should rise for
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to this curriculum committee meeting of May 8th. Do we have any public comment at all?
We have none.
Okay. Moving on, review of the minutes. Y'all received them.
There you go. Here's another copy.
Okay. You have them already? Okay.
I think we got it.
Yeah, we do have
I think I did it.
it. Okay. Okay.
Well, you really want us to read these minutes, don't you?
It's important.
So I move to accept the minutes.
Okay, do I have a second? Any discussion, corrections, or amendments? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the minutes from the April 17, 2023 meeting, raise your hand. And any abstentions? Okay. So we, 2 and 1 abstention. All right, so our first order of business is kind of exciting because we've been hearing about this for a long time, is the introduction of the new textbook and resource material for the middle school.
So here are copies of the textbook recommendation. And I feel like this is a long-awaited presentation in that you've been hearing about the work of the committee for many months now. And today you will get a chance to hear from members of the committee. It was chaired by Kevin Hanlon, along with a cast of characters. We've got our elementary, which includes 6th grade, math coach, Tom Toscano, the math division leader, Megan Mahan, who is the math coach at the middle school. You've got a variety of teachers from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And tonight we have both, and Mrs. Grillo, who also was on that committee from its inception. So why don't you all come and join us, and I'll turn it over to Kevin to sort of kick us off, and then we can answer any questions that you may have.
So thank you. You've been hearing about this group for a while, and I have to give them so much credit because, as I mentioned to this group last time, our as advertised timeline went a little bit longer than originally anticipated, and sincerely for all good reasons, because it really mattered to us taking the time that we needed to fully vet and not jump to any conclusions before we were ready. But it did mean that both Kelly, Tom, and this whole committee met a few more times than was originally planned, and I give them a lot of credit for taking thought, care, professional feedback to help us make a decision, because this is an important resource for us over 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we had a little bit of conversation about how long we would want this resource to last last time, and I'm not sure I have a pure answer for that, but I know that with the time involved, that we're set up for the longer version of what it would be rather than the shorter version. So if I'll start with just a little bit of part of the reason why we got into this in the first place, and it has to do with our current resource not really fully being standards aligned, and the work of our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers to put into place some curricular changes, revisions, and to utilize the resource that we have to the greatest extent. They have done an excellent job of that. And going forward, we're looking for something that is better aligned, so our time, effort, and energy is going on the instructional side to help all students meet these standards rather than trying to fix the resource to fit the standards. So that was an original premise of this group, and any of the resources that we vetted had that standards alignment for multiple categories. You'll see that we're listed as kind of gateways in the documentation, already aligned. And I'm by the numbers look is a color-coded list of criteria. A by the numbers look as we whittle down those resources to two that were really kind of our highest two rated resources, one being Illustrative Math and the second being iReady. You can see that we reviewed in detail relative to the standards, relative to assessments, relative to instruction, learning tasks, materials, for a total. So by the numbers, what you see in front of you is the work of the committee doing side-by-side comparison of each of these programs. And if you can see at the very bottom, it says average and total scores, and you'll notice that our iReady rating was a 2.83, where 3 was the highest in meeting criteria, and our IM rating was 2.63. You notice the little plus columns just to the right of the ratings, and because our highest bar was kind of meets criteria, if both resources met the criteria by the raters who were on this front, but one was a little bit stronger than the other, but we didn't have a way to denote above. I asked them to indicate that with a plus. And some people played by those rules and put pluses, and some people put lots of pluses. But we only counted if they put a plus. So you can see by the average rating and the number of times that iReady kind of had the advantage over Illustrative Math, that we had a pretty clear, by the numbers, candidate to bring forward to you for a recommendation. And what I'm hoping Tom and Kelly can do tonight on behalf of the committee is share just a little bit of insight into the thinking, not the whole thing, because this was a lot of meetings, but a little bit of insight into the thinking of the committee that's behind these numbers. So what were some of the things that resonated with our committee as we were doing this work that kind of led us to recommending iReady? So I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to thank Kevin for leading the committee through this process. It was a very thorough process throughout the many months and many meetings, even though there were a few extra. It didn't necessarily feel like that because the work we were doing was very thorough and important, and it was very collaborative. Everyone on the team really had a lot of time to review the materials individually and then collectively have an opportunity to really discuss what our feelings were about them. And we had lots of opportunities as well to meet with publisher, the representatives from the publishing places, and then to really dig into through a number of activities that Kevin designed for us to compare things side by side once we got down to 2. It was well done, exceptionally well done, and I did add a lot of pluses along the way for iReady, which was my favorite, I think, early on, because it really did align well with, again, the standards, but also with our approach to teaching math and the things that we value about teaching math in terms of making sure that we are putting problems in front of our kids that allow them to think, and the practices that our teachers use when planning for high-quality instruction in a math class includes really fostering those opportunities where kids are doing the thinking, teachers are allowing that opportunity, of course, by developing the appropriate questions. iReady has those, so those grapple problems, designing the lessons so that that is front and center, and then teachers, of course, having questions and scaffolding along the way to really support and prompt that thinking when it's needed along the way. So those are some of the things that were really stood out to us initially, really got our attention. The data piece was another one. It has a wonderful assessment options for us, both as benchmark assessments and diagnostics along the way. So it will provide for teachers really in-depth information on where our kiddos are in terms of mastering those standards along the way, and how they can use that information to really plan for individualizing instruction for kids and meeting their needs.
Yeah, from the teacher standpoint, the thing that jumped out was their philosophy, which you touched on a little bit, was very clear. Every unit is broken down into, there's an explore portion, which is, we want, as we get away from mimicking, as we get away from teacher-guided learning, it was great to see every topic starts with an explore. They're exploring, they are refining, they're developing, they're thinking. So that's the good 2 to 3 days of not just a quantity of problems, but the quality and different types of questions they're asking, that's when teachers can really get down with students and work with them as they learn those skills, and then a refined portion. So having very clear expectations of we're going to explore a topic, we're gonna have time to develop it, and then we're really gonna refine it. And in that refine phase, we loved especially how their notes really push away from, you know, write this down, or here's a scale. It's all about what are your takeaways? It's helping the students develop their thought process through each topic. So it's really personalizing for the kids there. It's really pushing all that onto them. The usability is another huge plus for us from the teacher standpoint. We've been doing a lot of great things, I think, in our classrooms. It's not, you know, we're not doing this because what we're doing isn't working. Whether it's our choice assessments we've shared a little bit about, building thinking classrooms is another huge part of what we're doing. Our ability to integrate what we're already doing in the classroom is off the charts with this, where a lot of the other ones are start from scratch, every minute is accounted for. So we feel like not only is it, you know, perfectly aligned, it'll help raise our instruction, not necessarily change it.
I'll add on, just one of the things that was unanticipated for me on the level of rigor, which is important for us. You heard Tom say it, and the quality of the problems that were there. If you had asked me ahead of our review, I would have predicted that the lesson would have had a higher rating there. And I think it is a rigorous program for sure. And what we reviewed, we saw at least equal rigor, but higher in some spots that we weren't necessarily anticipating. So that was important for us. That was something that I wasn't necessarily anticipated as we got into looking at this particular resource. In addition to vetting some of these off to the side, we also tried out some of the lessons. Tom invited us into his classroom. I dusted off my own teaching cobwebs and went into a couple Doolittle 6th grade classrooms, say, okay, we think this matches well with kind of this thinking classrooms idea that you heard. Let's try it out. Let's layer that on. So some 6th grade teachers were gracious to let me take over the class for a day and try it out. And the things that we thought would be true in terms of usability of this program seem to pan out. Doesn't mean it's going to be without its challenges. We're certainly conscious of the time it's going to take to prepare and the timing of kind of the scope and sequence of the lessons. But it definitely rose to a pretty unanimous committee decision on that part to bring forward for a recommendation. The other things I'll say about implementation, should the board move forward with this recommendation, we're poised to have some training dates in June, 2 training dates, one kind of focused on 6th grade, one on 7th and 8th grade, and building in some planning time, because as I think I mentioned to you before, the last thing we want anybody doing is kind of getting this resource new in August and going, how do we do this? So iReady is going to come to us for some training and then stay with a small group to help plant some seeds of planning on our course pathways and how to use the resources in kind of our course pathways. And then we have some time built in to carry out some of those plans. So should this recommendation go forward, we're poised to, before we walk away from here at the end of June, by the end of kind of the CWI timeline, we would be in really good shape to implement in August.
Did you guys get a chance to review this?
I didn't, no, but can you just remind us how many sources you started with when you were reviewing?
I don't remember.
So 10 to 12 was our initial starter list. They were the ones who kind of met the gateway. We looked more closely at 5 to 6 of them. We got in contact with 3 vendors. We didn't pursue one of them after the vendor contact. We pursued these 2 after the vendor contact to do things like try out lessons and come back and get additional vendor contact and those kind of things. So that was our process. So we started with a pretty big pool. And initially whittled away some of them, but really kind of a dozen down to 5 or 6, down to 3, down to these 2.
So, iReady being used by other school districts in Connecticut, I mean, are there, I don't know if you've reached out to any other schools that they're using it, the experience, lessons learned, anything like that, so I'm curious.
Yes,
where-
it is being used, and I was supposed to bring that list, I have that list, I apologize for that. Our contact with some of the districts have their feedback on iReady. There's a couple different things, because some districts are using iReady just an assessment, and we're using iReady the curriculum, so that's an important distinction. But yes, it is being used by several Connecticut districts. We did get on a call with the equivalent math coach in one of the districts to say, what's your experience with it? And their experience is largely, it's very well standards aligned. Instructionally, they wanted to make sure that teachers had all the underlying skills and knowledge to be able to implement this, and I think we've got that. That wasn't necessarily a concern of ours. And then we got into talking about just some different parts of the program that are really some personalized learning pathways and different ways that districts are using it. So we've had a little bit of contact with other districts who have used it.
But no red flags or anything that would be questioned.
No red flags on that front.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, so I think we touched on this a little bit in the last meeting too, but how well does this integrate with the elementary math program and the high school program? And obviously they're 2 different publishers and titles, so how are we gonna handle that?
Yeah, so both what we're using elementary-wise and iReady are built from the standards up. So the advantage of that piece is there's a lot of alignment just through that. You'll hear that Eureka relies on visual models a lot to help develop students' conceptual understanding. Some of those same visual models show up in iReady, they show up in Illustrative too. So we felt that meshed pretty well and will not be vastly different, even though it's a different publisher, will not be vastly different for our elementary students going into middle school. In fact, it'll be certainly stronger than that transition right now because the resource is built from the standards up. In terms of bridging to high school, I think I may have previewed last time, the course that's going to bridge to high school is Algebra 1, and that's one that I know that is probably going to be next review for this group to make sure, well, some version of this group, this is elementary, but I know that's on the list for
At
Lisa.
the high school, or,
Yeah,
yeah.
Lisa, Tom, and myself to be considering for a resource, so
Okay.
that's,
I think too, what we did to start off the year was early in the fall, started with meeting with Lisa Bernabe as the department chair, started with having Alicia Nailway as the elementary person there, sitting in this room around this table to say, okay, what is, make sure our philosophy is aligned before we start to look at textbooks. So we left there, Tom was involved in that meeting, myself, Kevin, to make sure that, okay, this is what we're thinking, this is where we're headed, and have since circled back to make sure that Lisa is included. So it's as seamless as you're going to get with having all the players, you know, present and on board with the resource. The last thing we want to do is have, you know, half the district wanting one resource and half the other. And
Right.
this is very, very tightly aligned.
Okay. And then, how are you gonna measure success? Are we,
have multiple measures?
no, I meant in terms of, yeah, we got the right program. Are we going to see improvement in the SBACs? Are we gonna, I know that there has been questions about, what happens with 8th graders jumping into 9th and 10th grade math and some of the scores, and how are we going to know that
So I think we have multiple measures, right? I think we have our benchmark assessments that we'll be able to tell our kids mastering the standards. I think we're going to have certainly smarter balance data to be able to see what that's reflective of. We'll be able to see how our students are doing on the day-to-day. We'll be looking at them as a cohort. We'll be able to look at how are they doing as far as the number of kids needing intervention. So when I say we have multiple measures, it's not just one thing, but it's all of those things, with ultimately us wanting to make sure that kids can take the highest level of math that they are capable of, so they continue to be college and career ready when they enter those classes at the high school. So it's not just one thing, but it's all of the things. That being said, I don't want to, scare my friend Tom Toscano here as he is about to launch this, or Kelly, as they're about to launch this at the middle school. Like, our teachers need time over the summer. They need training, they'll need support and coaching to make sure that they have the support they need to make sure that they're comfortable with a new resource and that they can deliver that to their students.
So I will say this is a much different resource than Big Ideas of Camp Now. And that is 100% by design. We've already started to take some of the philosophy of the district and do it outside of the resource. That philosophy is already kind of built in here. So we'll say the excitement in our department is very high for this. Me even just volunteering, hey, we might be able to meet the Monday after school ends. I have 100% of my department being like, let's do it, we're in for training. Which usually it's like, if we do have summer hours, people are like, nope, see you in August. So there is that excitement. As far as success, one of the things, I forgot we didn't mention was the day-to-day data that this gives is vastly superior to what we have right now. Everything that we do online on this is stored on there, where we start the next unit and we can look up prerequisite skills, and it will tell us where every student is towards mastery on those prerequisite skills. So we know right away when we're starting a brand new unit, hey, these 5 students struggled a little bit in this area, these struggled in this area, these struggled in this. So we're obviously hoping that builds to success on something like an SBAC and then later on the SATs, but it is built to give us great data right away to help, ensure student success in the moment.
And those practices were in place. We were just working a lot harder to put them in place because we didn't have a resource that supported us. A lot of the time, effort, and energy our teachers were putting in, we're creating all of these structures in spite of, having this resource that didn't really support us. We were having to manipulate and edit and revise a lot along the way in order to get to the things that we know and value as important things, like a pre-assessment, like progress monitoring, like those problems that really will give kiddos time to think and grapple together. This is all there for us.
It's something as simple as we've spent years trying to make those SBAC type questions that have that rigor built in that need perseverance. It's already done for us. So now it's just our time. How are we going to make sure our instruction helps kids get there instead of spending all that time creating something and then go from there.
And so it will be, the kids will all get textbooks, and then there will be an online.
No, physical textbooks.
We do have physical texts, and they're out for display there, so that'll be definitely at least a classroom resource for everybody. And there's a digital companion to that, so every student will have access to the digital platform. We also have a physical resource also for students.
And maybe if you guys can just explain a little bit about when we say digital resource, I just want to, and not that anybody here thinks this, but it's not the textbook online where you're just flipping through like a book online. It really is much deeper, much richer than that sitting on the shelf can provide.
Which they have that. Like, that's one of the many resources they have is a online textbook. But videos, practice for both below, at, and above standard in every single lesson. They have that practice already there. There's
with instructional support. So if I'm a student who's figured out, one of the things that happens at the beginning of every unit is, here's the things I need to understand by the end of this unit. And students are literally doing a self-assessment on that. So as they go along the way, and like, ooh, I'm kind of stuck on this, there are resources that they can go to for that instruction and practice. That can be prompted by the teacher, but can also be prompted by themselves going, I'm stuck on this piece yet. And that's some of the design of this that we like is, no matter where the students are in that, they can get to the supports and extensions that are going to be a good match for them at that time.
And it's easily manipulated, or easily,
Very user-friendly.
it's user-friendly, thank you. Yeah, there was a phrase out there.
That was- Yeah.
And the kids are better than us at the
Okay.
user-friendly anyways, but yeah.
Okay.
The other neat piece, Tom just reminded me that we were really intrigued by was a really wonderful parental communication piece that was embedded along the way for each of, I forget how they're framed, is it unit, it's
It's a lesson which is essentially a week.
yeah, so wonderful communication for parents to have insight into what is my child learning in math. And, you know, what does that look like today, in today's math, math classroom. So we have that with Eureka Math in K through 5, and we have really valued that and used that very consistently and in all of our grade levels. And our parents have found that as a wonderful resource, and I would expect that to be the same now that we have that with iReady. I think our teachers will really use that, communicate that out, and really support our parents in knowing what's going on in math.
And then just a budget question, so, is this going to be for 2022, is it gonna go into this year's budget, or are you
So
trying to get that into next year's?
I would like to get it into this year's.
Yeah.
But it has to go, with your approval, it would sit for 2 weeks for public
Right.
review. That gets us to after the 18th, which is our next board meeting. So I know our next meeting isn't until the 30th, and that's really not exactly the place to do it. We would like to go ahead, again, we want to train teachers in June. So I think we might have to sort of think about when this can be approved, and then when we can cut the check for that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So at this stage, we need a motion to recommend, or,
Motion to recommend to the full board with the requisite at least 2 weeks of availability for public review.
I move that. I think we need some.
Did you get my motion, Tim?
Might it read something like Dr. Harrigan made a motion to move iReady Classroom Mathematics by iReady Classroom to the full board for approval after the appropriate 2-week period where it is available for public review.
That's exactly what I
I thought that's what you meant to say.
Okay. Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Yeah.
So did this committee.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for all the work on this. I know it's been
Thank
a journey.
you.
Much appreciated.
All right,
I just want to say thank you, Tom and
yeah,
Kelly.
both of you guys, the whole team,
Well,
really.
yeah, the
The
whole team, but,
team was amazing.
I mean, we did a new process a couple of years ago with the high school envision, and
Yes, we
I think
did.
having brought this, we feel really good, and throughout the process, it was not find the first good thing. It was really what is the best thing. We really feel that way, so thank you.
And it's also great to hear that teachers are interested.
Yeah, they are.
That's always a positive.
All the way across, 6 through 8. Everyone was really pleased with it.
Thank you.
Great, thanks so much.
Next one is fun. I mean, not that this wasn't, sorry.
This is another fun agenda item.
Right.
Kevin's gonna put that in the minutes.
So, out of country field trip to Italy.
Yes, another high school trip.
Maureen, I do have some copies. Would you like me to share?
Board members are required to go, right?
Yes,
Well, you have many choices next April. Yeah, so this one's to Italy by our English teacher, Josephine Countryman, and the Italian teacher, Katie Obrowski. Oh, I'm sorry, did I mess that up?
I have such little to say. I think I could have gotten it straight. Okay, so they're going to Italy, and some of the places they're gonna be visiting are Milan, Venice, Florence, Rome. They have a 10-day trip, Sorrento region, 10-day trip planned. And it's not one of those trips where they're interacting with other school children, but they are going to, visit the sites and learn more about the culture that they're studying in school anyway through their classes.
It's 11 days total.
And so this all falls within,
2 days are prior to vacation starting, Thursday and Friday, which a lot of these out-of-country trips need a couple extra days. So.
Interesting extravagant sites throughout Rome, Florence.
These trips are getting more and more expensive. We're seeing that at college.
any questions? Anybody? Okay, hearing none, do I have a motion?
In the linked agenda, you have access to the total itinerary, all 11 days, what they do on each day, which regions they'll visit. So if you had any interest in looking at the pictures and with descriptions, you certainly have access to that.
And the food.
But I'm lying.
So do we have a motion to, does anyone want to make a motion to approve the trip?
You want to turn?
Sure. I move that, I'll move this to the board. Board's approval.
Yes.
No, we approve.
It is.
Approve it
Which
here.
one? Yeah. So I make a motion to committee approve the April 4th to 14th, 2024 Italy field trip for Cheshire High School.
Second.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great,
Thank you.
okay,
So,
that's good. Next up is informational items. First one is the past pupil attitudes to self in school.
We do need a recommendation to the full board. Sorry.
Okay.
Approved by principal and assistant superintendent, and the superintendent reviewed by the curriculum committee with a recommendation to the full board, just to clarify. So if we could
Okay,
just
so
amend
we're-
that.
Okay. So,
Can we just amend that motion?
So
to
we- yes.
Approve it with recommendation to the full board.
okay.
Sorry, Tommy.
no, it's okay. Process it.
I think our vote is not going to change, is it?
No, I've been amending it to recommend for the board item for full.
Okay, I think Kevin's got it in the minutes, unless you want to formally do it.
Let's just make
Motion's
sure.
been made.
Yes,
Second.
second, thank you, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right, now, moving on to informational items. We have, first up is the past pupil attitudes to self in school.
Yes, so joining us today is Jonathan Strout from PASS, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we're looking at today. This is a pupil attitudes to self and school survey. We've been talking, and the board's been talking for quite a long time about how do we measure, how do we get a sense of, how do we know how our students are doing relevant to social emotional learning. How are they feeling around any number of indicators that talk about their social emotional learning skills. So Jonathan is here today. Hi Jonathan, can you hear us okay?
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for coming, Jonathan. We appreciate this. Jonathan is one of the representatives from PASS, and I've invited him here tonight to talk to you a little bit about the tool that we feel his company has that could be beneficial to a need that we've had here in Cheshire for quite a while to really hone in on those social emotional learning skills. And we like this particular program because it really asks students and gives student voice to these things that we've been trying to teach, as well as really looking at their attitudes, right? Their attitudes about school, their attitudes about the work that they're doing, and their attitude overall will give us some indicators on how we can proceed in the district. And this is a K through 12 resource. We had started by, I had met with Jonathan individually. The next step was we sat down and met with Kevin Hanlon and Jeff Solon. From there, we looped in Robin and Carey and had a follow-up meeting. After that, I shared some of this information with all of the administrators in the district during one of our admin council meetings. Following that, Robin brought the information to all of the school counselors, K through 12 in the district, to see how the school counselors could benefit from some of the information that the students would be giving us through this survey. And the next step was to get your input on it as well and to hear from Jonathan directly. So Jonathan, I am going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Marlene. Good evening, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Feel free to stop me at any point, but just to give you an overview, pupil attitudes to self in school. We are a 15-minute student attitudinal survey, really designed to help you get a proactive handle on issues that students may be facing. We like to fashion ourselves as the Switzerland of SEL and universal screeners because everything we help schools measure has a direct impact in the work that they're doing. Pupil attitudes about themselves in schools, we're measuring the non-academic barriers that may be getting in the way of student achievement, but we're not measuring things that might cause the need for an immediate threat assessment. There's no questions about drug and alcohol use, no questions about self-injurious behavior, or otherwise deeper, more concerning issues students may be facing, but we do give a very good look at a window into how students are feeling. So that you can strengthen things at Tier 1, see what's working, all the way down to the more intensive Tier 3 intervention levels. And I appreciate that I was able to come on after the iReady presentation because the analogy that's easy to use is we're the screener for student well-being. Just as iReady, it looks like you're bringing on to help you understand exactly what students need in math. That's where we fit in as the measurement piece from a student well-being perspective. Looking at the MTSS model and helping to educate the whole child, it's important that we have that objective data. So students take a survey and you have immediate data results that you can see from the district level down to the individual student level. And then once you have that data, and we come back in with supports and interventions that we recommend, you're able to then put that in place with some real easy to action interventions for kids so that we can move them forward. And important to note, some of our most important things that we do is help you identify kids that are most at risk and also then support staff with interventions that work. And I like to show what it looks like for the students. Students in grades K through 2 see 27 statements. Here's an example. I like being in school. Binary response choices, yes I agree, no I disagree. You can put the headphones on and listen to it. But still, even with the little ones, just about 15 minutes. Older students that are in grades 3 through 12, as Marlene mentioned, it is standardized, and we are a K-12 survey, but it looks different, obviously, based on developmental age. So grades 3 through 12 would see 50 statements. They're chunked 5 to a screen, and they're on a 4-part Likert scale, and that's important to note because that helps give you more rich and accurate data. That middle column has been taken out because sometimes kids will, go down the middle, so they have to pick a side. And there's an example of 5 to 50 statements students in 3 through 12 would see. And then so when the students hit submit, you're going to get data results in really 3 domains: school connectedness, which the CDC talks about, and really being that most important protective factor in keeping kids from risky behavior and going down a path that we want to keep them from going down. But you'll get metrics on how kids feel about school, can help uncover underlying concerns as it relates to school climate, or harassment, intimidation, and bullying concerns you may otherwise not know. Attitudes towards teachers, help you understand that kids feel like the teachers in front of them are the champions to help move them through their schooling experience. Attitudes towards attendance is a really big one because we've seen such a drop-off with all the districts, many of the districts we work with, post-COVID. And so now imagine with a survey on how students feel about the importance of coming to school and that impact when kids flag red there, but they're still in school, we're able to put interventions in place, because if we don't, they're 6 to 12 months away from being in that habitual truancy pipeline. Down the middle in this domain, self-efficacy, help you understand the internalized feelings kids bring with them. Perceived learning capability measures whether or not students feel they can be successful now. And if they have a love for learning, preparedness for learning, kids are going to tell you in taking the survey, they feel they have the skills, executive functioning, concentration, and the like to meet the success. And confidence in learning is essentially perseverance through the challenges that school brings, really tied to grit, growth, mindset type measures. And self-regard, those are the long-term feelings of self-worth. So knowing that and having access to that can be huge in helping shape the life of the kid and meet them where they are in all of these. And then finally, on the motivational side, response to curriculum demands. The kids are going to tell you they feel the work is too hard, or if it's too easy, or if it's that just right fit. And the general work ethic, really metrics to see how kids feel about their current K-12 educational experience and how it ties into their post-K-12 goals. So the statements will feed into multiple factors, and then what you get is traffic light reporting from the district level down to the individual student level. And so red means at risk, and green means that things are stable. When you get into a district report, for example here, at the top, that's K2, we measure on 4 factors because of the abbreviated nature of that scale for the little ones. Grades 3 through 12, measurement on all 9 factors. So partners that we work with that see something like this may say, okay, grade 5, we have lots of colors flagging. You may need to do some things to strengthen transitions for those kids as they get ready to go out to middle school. Or grade 9, looking horizontally across the grade levels, you see some real concerns there in their feelings about school on a larger level and self-regard as a learner. But then also from a district perspective, confidence in learning jumps out because we have colors that are flagging in almost every grade level. So it can be real helpful in helping shape a strategic plan for a district. Schools get reports that show raw scores at the top. So for example, feelings about school, 85% of the students had very positive feelings about school. That's great, we can celebrate that, but within our interactive dashboard and custom reports we offer, you can very quickly see the 15% of the students that don't, and intervene now and put them in a place to be more successful. Where you see the colors down at the bottom, that's based on standardized measures, so it gives you a different perspective when you factor in their like-age peers outside of Cheshire that have taken the survey as well. And then 2 more cohort reports can really help with inclusive concerns that you may otherwise be unaware of, equity issues, the bar graphs at the top, again, raw scores, in this example, boys versus girls, and then you see standardized at the bottom. And then finally, when we look at the individual student reports, I like to point an arrow on some of these students, Sarah and Cameron. You see lots of red flags that you may not be aware of. Great opportunity right away to be able to put supports in place. Many times when we see this type of data set for kids, they already have a lot of supports in place, but it's helpful to know. We talk a lot about kids like an Amy Benson, who we refer to as the hidden child. On those outside of those school connectedness measures on that first domain, you see that she's green and very stable, so she presents very well. However, on the inside, perceived learning capability very low, confidence in learning beneath the first percentile. So Amy looks like perhaps a model student, but deep down she has some issues that we can help support with some light and minor tweaks and really set her up for greater success so she doesn't end up going down a path like Sarah or Cameron. So that is, my presentation in a nutshell in terms of an overview, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So when will this be administered?
It would be nice if we'll try to administer it in the fall, after September, October, when kids get acclimated, and then again in the spring. Jonathan was kind enough to share with me, and I will certainly collect these. This is proprietary questions from the survey, but I think given surveys these days, it's incredibly important that you see the questions.
Yeah, I'm familiar with.
So the first one that I handed out, Jonathan, is the K2, and that has a series of the 27 questions where students would either, did I get it wrong? Yeah. Agree or disagree. And then the next one I'm handing out is the ones for grades 3 through 12. And that is a series of 50 questions. And I love how Jonathan refers to this as the Switzerland of attitudinal surveys.
So before this was, I assume, notification by the parents that they can survey, explain that, and this is
Yes.
about, the usual sample questions that are not school criteria.
Right.
Would there be, is there any, this will be given in school classroom, or is there
This will be
ability to
given-
take this at home with parental supervision?
It would be given in school, in the classroom, like our other types of assessments. It's all connected to PowerSchool, so there's no, any of the information that we have on the student would be specifically what the parents registered in PowerSchool. So we would come up with their name, and I think what's really nice about this is that student that Jonathan just mentioned, who appears on the outside that everything's going fine, but the benefit of this type of a survey is really to the teacher, because the teacher will be able to see this information and then knows how to work with the student in class to either boost their confidence or to group them differently. There's a way to embed those social emotional learning skills in the classroom, and so that's really what this is targeting. You've heard us talk a lot about embedding social emotional learning into academics all year through the showcases. And this gives teachers the tool that they need to be able to get better insight into their students. From the district level, we can look at the whole school, right? So the whole district. And I think that would be something that the board would be interested in, as we've been focused on social emotional learning for such an extensive period. Then in my role, we can break that down and look at individual schools and see how they're doing. And the benefit of this is Jonathan would come out after the first administration, and he would walk our team through using the platform, which from what we've seen is very intuitive and easy to use. So we'd make sure that school counselors knew how to use this, that teachers knew how to use this. And
Parents be able to see their child's scores?
I don't know that we would share those directly, like a Smarter Balanced or any kind of a
That's
test
what I was
result.
thinking, yeah.
But I think what we would be able to do would be a tool for the teacher to have, like at parent conferences.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna work on this because Marlene, needs to work on this skill and tying it into Castle.
Well, I would imagine if we did find, I think it was an Amy example there, right, where, and it was a parent-teacher conference, teacher to talk about the things they're doing to help turn some of those around, and maybe use this name right away, just looking at the survey, and start focusing.
Yeah,
It definitely helps put some qualitative behind the
right, not so subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm with you. I think the more you can share with parents, the better. I think it just creates a better environment. The parent is working with the teacher to bolster the kids at home. If you've got a little one who's saying, no, of course I don't think carefully about my work. If they even understand the question, I'm sure they do. The parent can then work and ask in their own gentle way questions to really kind of build that up. So I would encourage sharing versus not. But I do have a question. What about that? 3 through 12, okay, grade 3 through 12. I was that smart alecky sophomore who, if I can read well on a bad day or on a snarky day, I would say, no, not at all. How can you, are there what's the word I want, backups in this that will be able to weed out those kids who are just kind of, having one of those days, and so you're not getting a kid who's thrown the test just because he knows he can, because how do you protect against that?
Yeah, that's a question that we're often asked, and I think there's a couple of ways that you do that. When kids understand that you're trying to get their voice and their input because you really want to make the school experience better for them, that in and of itself can open up an opportunity to really strengthen just the climate and the culture within schools. We've seen that happen. It really comes down to the consistent and common message around why you're doing it. And so when you build that capacity and kids understand that it's important, they're more likely to take it more seriously. Just as they may blow off state testing, it's hard to keep that from happening. The other thing too is you can see the amount of time a student sat for the survey. And so if you wanted to go back and cross-reference how seriously they took it, you know, it's a 15-minute survey. If a kid clicked through it in 2 minutes, they probably didn't take it very seriously. So there are some of those factors that you can take a look at. But it's really about setting up the proper parameters. So kids know that there's value in it, and then they take it seriously. Maybe even I would argue more seriously than they take some standardized academic assessments.
And Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 3 through 12 survey is really looking at 50 questions, but it's relating only to 9 indicators. So we're not going to get results back on how a child answered every single question, but sort of get that composite. And
Yes.
then the other thing I like to say is, you know, this is not a high stakes kind of a thing. This is an attitudinal survey. We're not identifying anyone for any heavy duty anything with this, right? This is not going to qualify someone for special education. It's not going to qualify someone for anything that's any type of a label. This is just to give additional information to the classroom teacher so that we can better meet students' needs. And it's only one indicator, you know? So the way they shake out is one thing, and then what you see in the classroom, how they, you know, what their work ethic is, all of those needs to be taken, so we're looking at it holistically. Anything to add to that, Jonathan?
No, that was very well said. And, you know, you help get that whole child view with their input. So it's an important data piece to add into the feedback you're getting from teachers, referrals, looking at data and attendance on that side, academic data. Now you have the objective voice of the students. You ask them what they need, they'll tell you, and that's what we help with. So I appreciate the way you shared that, Marlene.
And does this satisfy the school climate?
Well, it's interesting because I've been thinking about that a lot, and boy, would I love it if this could take the place of that, but I couldn't answer that question today.
Do you need a waiver? Okay, that would be good, that would be interesting to know. I mean, if this fits
I
the
will
bill,
research that.
it certainly might, you know, be a little pressure release.
How widely is this being used, and how new is it? Because it looked like we'd be able to compare data with other schools.
I'm going to certainly let Jonathan answer that, but before I do, I just want to mention that Jonathan has a background in education. He used to be a school counselor. He was also a high school principal. So, you know, I just wanted to at least clarify that and give you a little background.
He speaks education.
There you go, there you go. Sorry, go ahead, Jonathan. I should have given you a better introduction.
I appreciate you blowing my cover, and now everyone knows my true background. No, we love what we do. We have more than 1,200 district and school partners across the U.S. Very large customer bases, especially in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, where I live, California, and we're growing into more and more states. I am working with RSD 7, which is Northwest Regional Middle School. They've actually just renewed for next year, and we're continuing to build partnerships. That's what I was brought on to work with the New England region, so I'm excited for those opportunities. And certainly can share more of that out offline. Marlene, if there's anything you need more about our partner relationships throughout the U.S., I can share that. And to answer your question, so we've actually been in business for quite some time. We were recently, and I don't think I shared this with you, Marlene, but acquired by Renaissance Learning because of the value that we bring, because they see that gap missing in the work that they're doing with SEL. So we're super excited about that. And so, yeah, we've been growing significantly, as have, you know, so many solution providers in the SEL space, because there's such a need, especially with
very interesting because areas of the country, education is very different. And to be coming into New England with this very long tradition of very traditional schooling, might be really interesting. I like data. I like data analysis. So, yeah, I'm just seeing. You need somebody?
Now it's an interview, now I'm telling you.
I've made this all about me, Jonathan.
I will let my manager know that you are open to employment opportunities.
Not really. Thank you.
I appreciate
It
it.
is interesting.
Any other questions?
No, this is great, thank you.
Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, everyone, have a good night.
You too. Okay, and then the last item is the K-12 English Language Arts.
Last but not least,
Thank you for.
may I just collect those questions?
What's that?
May I collect the questions?
I can't post them online.
You share them with me and had asked that I not share them, but I told you them, you
Thank
all
you for
needed
being
to see
patient.
them.
Thank you.
That's what we do.
And I could share it at the board meeting on Thursday if you'd like to.
Yeah, nice.
So I'm gonna collect them.
Thank you.
So, just by way of intro without, I know you hear this a lot, but as part of our 5-year CCC review process, this year, the English Language Arts Department, chaired by Ian Wilderman and Kristen Shanley at the middle school, who could not unfortunately be here with us tonight, and of course Pat Castle, who you all know, who is our elementary reading consultant, along with Kevin Hanlon, who coordinates the K-8 program. They recently presented to the Cheshire Curriculum Council, and this is our opportunity to sit with them and get sort of the executive summary and hear about the work that they did over this past many years, as well as get a glimpse into the goals that they have set for the next 5 years. I want to say that this team did an absolutely incredible job. What they were able to convey to the committee was the through line through kindergarten through 12th grade, so that we are all working on the same skills in a continuum, which I think is very unique in how they were able to pull that off and really shows the work that's being done. I also wanted to add one more thing, and I'm forgetting what it was. The continuum, how they use this process for the way it is designed, which is to unearth problems of practice that you're having in your everyday classroom, or with a particular area of the curriculum, or with a particular standard or course. They really dug in, and I think they put an incredible amount of time and energy into this. So I'm just really excited that they're here to share this with you tonight. So take it away.
Tell me where you want to start.
Well, we could briefly, one of the first things we did is the three of us put together a K through 12 mission statement, something we didn't have before, which kind of connects to what Marlene was saying about making this much more of a K through 12 process. So we had a K through 6 mission statement, a mission statement from data, and a mission statement for the high school. So we took pieces of them and wordsmithed it together to come up with what we thought was our sort of shared K through 12 vision. I think just some key things, obviously the preparation for college career readiness, but also the part at the end to ensure achievement for every student. And I think you'll see that kind of through some of our goals, is not being happy with something that reaches most or many students, but really working on those things that stay true to that goal of ensuring achievement for every student. Marlene hit on a lot of this, but this was a vastly different process than 5 years ago. It really was. 5 years ago, it was essentially 3 different evaluations. You know, Pat evaluated K through 6, did her report. Kristen did 7 through 8. I did the high school. We met a handful of times to kind of share some of the things we had done. Came up with maybe a framework for how we would each present, for what we would each do with our different sections. and then broke apart and did a lot of the work. We would come back together a couple times just for kind of to touch base, break apart and do the work. We really took a completely different approach this year. We did our individual reports, looked at some of the data from surveys and some of the research we had done, some of the different instructional leaders from other schools we had talked to and schools we had looked at, but then came together, and instead of making a plan and going our separate ways, we did all those comparisons and created all the slides, created all the presentations, looked at all the different sections together, which took a lot more time. I think went from probably about 5 or 6 hours of direct meeting time 5 years ago to probably between 20 or 30 or more hours this time. We can meeting either at Dodd or the high school. Unfortunately, one time half of us went to the high school and half of us went to Dodd. So, but, yeah, with that meant. But I think.
Maureen, I'm so sorry. Maureen was also integral in this process and really coordinates this piece at the high school. I'm sorry, Maureen. You know what it was? Visually, I wasn't seeing you that day. I think you wanted me ask evaluation or something, and I didn't have you in my mind's eye.
But it was, we talked along the way about how worthwhile it was because of doing it K through 12. That we really, it's called the collaborative evaluation, and that's really what it became. We kind of looked K through 12, what are things that are working K through 12, and what are some things we really noticed we want to identify and work on as a district K through 12. And so, whereas 5 years ago, we kind of did our separate, 5 years ago it was almost more of an affirmation in terms of, as we looked at each different school, whereas this, it was much more of an evaluation. And so, whereas 5 years ago it was, we did our, here's what's going well, and then came up with a couple goals and things we thought we could work on. Here, the goals we came up with were through the process. As we were working, the three of us would say, this is something we can use as a goal, this is something we know we need to work on. So it really was a good collaborative process and almost a microcosm of a goal we have for our teachers of now doing some, not just cross-grade level, but cross-school level collaboration to have so they can have that experience as well. We won't spend as long on every slide, but I think
No, I actually remember 20.
the shift in the process has been,
I didn't take anything negative about it. I remember being structured. I appreciate the approach.
So one of the things that we use to help us kind of see through our curriculum in across, K through 12 was the guiding questions. So we asked ourselves when we met, what does our vertical alignment look like in terms of the curriculum and standards, okay? So going from kindergarten to 3rd grade, to 6th grade, to 8th grade, to 12th grade, are we aligned, and what does that alignment look like? So some of the things that we thought were the positives, and honestly, we got at it through a lot of conversations and studying and the research that we did. By the way, the research, some of it was researching our past goals and if we had achieved them or not, and researching our the teacher survey. We had surveys from the teachers, from the students, from the parents, and we had convened teacher committees, subcommittees who studied all that with us and sort of pulled out those little factors. And these are the things that we thought were working, that we had going for us, the accommodations. Our curricular units are all organized around the Common Core standards. So that is something that, as the math personnel said when they were here before, the fact that the K-12 standards exist and they are already articulated K through 12, that was something that we could use to our benefit. That means that a kindergarten student is literally working on the same standard that he or she would be working on in 11th grade or 12th grade. It looks different in kindergarten, it looks different in 4th grade, what you have to do, but it's constantly building on because all of the standards are moving towards an anchor standard, which is your ultimate standard, right? What you're going to have at the end. So the standards-based approach ensures that students are developing same key skills regardless of content. So, in one grade you're reading a picture book, and at the high school you're reading a novel, but still working on the same key standards, like what's going on here, what are the key details, how do I connect these details, what about the vocabulary? Everyone's working on the same important standards.
I like that quote on the bottom.
Oh,
I'm student, because maybe here or there, but Common Core is what now, it's 10, 11 year. If I remember, it was like 2011. Yeah.
We've had our curriculum for about 12 years.
Yeah, I remember-
Whether you're talking about writing or reading, because one came.
But I remember a lot of the concerns board members had back then, other folks, was how rigid would it be, and, would it restrict the teacher's ability to wander from a particular topic, because there might be kids in the class that need a different context to learn a skill. So I'm happy to see, that you are using Common Core, but have the ability to basically deep dive in a particular topic where it makes sense to, or present it another way that maybe it is not a strict example from a standard, but get you this, because
The thing that you want to avoid is like that saying, the houses are all made out of ticky-tacky and they're all look exactly the same.
Right.
But writing products, we don't want everyone's writing products to look exactly the same, to say the exact same thing. Yes, the standards are there, that you have to meet, right? That you have to, in an informative piece, you have to give information. You have to organize your information. You have to have an introduction and a closing. There's a lot of ways to do those things. So there's a lot of room for, the individual and for individual expression. And even formats could be different. But the standards are, they're just basic. They're general, basic items that you have to hit. So yeah, that helps. It is interesting to see all the comments that students make, that parents make. I wish you could see all of the comments, but that's one of the things that makes it challenging to have a committee to take, 50 comments and say, okay, so the respondents said, because people say a lot of different things, but we did look for the commonalities, right? So our recommendations out of the committee were, we would like the process of following that articulation from place to place, and we want to do more of it. So one of our goals would be more cross-grade level collaboration. So from 6th to 7th grade, and from 8th to 9th grade, and even at the elementary level, from primary to intermediate, to meet more across grade levels and identify ways that, for example, it was funny one day we were working and someone said, oh no, we do that we do argumentative in 6th grade. We're like, oh, you do? Oh yeah, I mean, they do argument. So it changes in elementary, but how would you know if you weren't in an elementary school? So this process is helping us identify where things change and what's common, right? In a lot of ways, 6th grade has more in common with 7th grade because their curriculum is in a different set of standards. And also we found one of our goals is an increased focus on writing and language standards. So language would be grammar and conventions, right? So they're under the language standards. And that was identified as a need by, I would think, by all the stakeholders. So teachers had comments about that, parents. Not as many comments from parents, but students had, feedback that showed us that, okay, it's time to look at the writing again. And we'll tell you more about that.
And then as playing the part of Kristen Chandler tonight, as they dip into text resources and technology, the guiding question was really about what types of reading are students at different grade levels. And this committee has actually heard a lot about this over the last year plus. So it will not be unfamiliar to you that things like daily independent reading with instructional conferences is at the core of elementary. Of course, that there are assigned texts within there and some small group application skills, but the bulk of what students are reading are independent reading. You'll notice that digital paper and digital text students are reading both, and you've heard from this group about making sure on balance that the vast majority of that is paper. And as we dip into middle and high school, that independent reading for both middle and high school remain a component of it. Nonfiction remains a component of it, and we have some shorter shared text in addition to book clubs and whole class canonical text at the high school. So that's kind of an assessment of what students are reading now. As we look to recommendations, really the themes that spanned the K-12 continuum were about the types of books that we're having in our classrooms that represent higher Lexile, more nonfiction. You've heard that sometimes it's difficult to get good nonfiction into our classroom libraries and into our courses, and books that have an increased cultural responsiveness. Relative to student choice, this is an area that showed up as something that was both a commendation and a recommendation, I think feeds into what Ian was sharing before. A lot of students recognize that they have choice in what they're reading. The increase in engagement by elevating that choice, particularly as you move up through the grade levels, is a concerted effort of some of the goals that the committee has laid out. And then you'll notice that some of the shared text at DOT are shorter. Doesn't mean they're always reading short text, so I don't want that to be anything that's captured tonight. Students are reading full-length things. But some of the shared text, what they're reading, everyone in the class is reading, much of that is of a shorter variety, and then they go to full class novels at the high school. So thinking about bridging that and what that looks like at DOT and what that looks like at the high school is part of the committee work. So that's really around what students are reading. And as we shift to the instructional strategies related to that, the guiding question was, does our progression of instructional strategies lead towards that college and career readiness? And specifically from our performance standards, are students becoming self-directed learners? So this was kind of the deep dive the committee took a look at as they were investigating and trying to uncover some of the problems of practice related to instruction. You'll see that there's some mirrors in the accommodations slide and the recommendations slide. So this is really about degrees. Yes, when asked, and some of the things that came out of the survey work, is students are aware of their goals and how they're going to demonstrate those goals. And they do know some of the next steps that they need to take as learners. They do have opportunities on the college and career readiness to develop speaking skills in class and have student discourse be a part of their instruction. There are times when we're embedding formative assessment, scaffolding, and differentiation into the instruction, and that came out through the surveys. And the majority of students do feel that they have choice, opportunities to make their own choice, and are challenged by their assignments. But as we flip to the recommendations, really it's based on to what degree. So yes, choice was present, but that idea that that's more frequent and more embedded in for all of our students, but especially at the high school, that's an important outcome from the recommendation from this investigation. And kind of a sub-question, okay, we have some supports to differentiate, to scaffold. Are those effective? And one of the reasons this question came up is there were some differences in how the teacher and student ratings as we went up through the grade levels. So it had the committee asking the question, okay, we're having some of these supports in place, but if they're not necessarily being perceived or received by the students and leading to getting to all students, maybe we need to look at that more carefully. So that's part of some of the goals around formative assessment and scaffolding. And even though they showed up in commendations, getting to all students, that was part of the flip to the recommendations.
One of the things that was commented on when we were discussing that was sometimes it's the case that as a teacher you do have embedded scaffolds, but you don't tell everybody what's up. Kevin and Ian, you guys are going to work over there on that, so we know about it, and sometimes it's not as well known by the students. Maybe it could be shared more so privately with some students, but we're thinking that in general the students reply differently because to some degree they may not be aware that others have those accommodations.
On the making student choice opportunities more frequent at the high school, is there an example where is it a certain course or a certain assignment? What do you
We've
see?
been working on it a good amount through a lot of courses by adding either independent reading units or lit circle units where they're reading in groups. And those often following the whole class where they're kind of learning the skills as a full class, learning how to read the novels, how to make inferences and things like that. But then given the chance when they can to apply those things they've learned on the whole class text independently. Because there's so much research in terms of both, not only can it increase their interest and engagement when they have choice, but it also increases their complex thinking and puts some of the responsibility for their learning on them, and so it works kind of well in a couple ways. But so choice texts have been more of our focus in the last few years, and creating more choices in terms of assessment, whereas, if the goal is to, discuss something like a theme in a text, instead of necessarily every student doing it through an essay, time after time, that there's different ways, different things the product can look like, where they're demonstrating the same standards, but they get to choose what that product is, which again gives them more responsibility, but also more engagement and more choice out there. And speaking of some of those assessments. So again, our guiding question for assessment was, what do our assessments tell us about our student achievement? So we've looked at a few different things for assessment. In a couple slides, we'll look at results from the surveys, as we talked about, from parent and student surveys especially, but we also looked at a lot of data from a number of different data points, some in school, some standardized, some state, some out of school, some nationwide testing. Some things that we noticed when we looked across the board, and one thing we noticed was that the common assessment trends that we saw correlated with what we saw from the standardized test, which seemed to be a good thing. If we're getting the same message from our in-class common assessments that we're getting when they take the standardized test, that seems to be a good indication that there's that alignment. Because obviously we can see more from common assessments, we can see more often and see on a day-to-day basis, whereas standardized tests you can only see once in a while, but also to know that there's a correlation between the two. Some things we noticed, and this is again K through 12, I'm kind of disseminating all of that information down. Definitely a strength is some very high performing students. Some of our highest performing students doing very well, have some students who definitely perform well overall. What we noticed in terms of things we'd like to work on and establish as goals is the yearly growth increasing, especially not as much in that middle band as amongst those high achievers, continuing that growth, not being happy with where they are, and then also on the students who might be on the lower end in terms of achievement, wanting to definitely work on increasing that growth. And one thing that came out of it too is noticing a certainly larger achievement gap than what we would like to see, that being the difference between our whole student population and higher need students. So that's definitely a goal we've established over the next 5 years is decreasing that gap between our whole school populations and our students of higher needs.
Higher needs students wouldn't be simply SPED students. They would include students with IEPs, include multilingual learners, and other
students on free and reduced lunch.
Free and reduced, yeah, all of the group areas.
Looking at those surveys, some commendations, students appreciate the variety of assessments. Some of the things they put beyond, some of them did say they appreciate writing essays. But creative writing, infographics, pamphlets, books, movie trailers, book talks, again, different ways to demonstrate their knowledge beyond just the essays. Appreciate the choice in assessments. Some of these student choices are options as a result of the Summer Curriculum Writing Institute. One of the DOG groups worked on that specifically this past summer, and so we're looking at some ways we can use that in the upcoming Curriculum Writing Institute as well. And something, this came from teachers, which makes sense, but also students really saw that their assessments are clearly connected to the Common Core standards. When the students responded on surveys about having clear rubrics, clear expectations, clear connection between what they're doing and their goals, that was one of the higher, more positive responses we got, so that was good to see. Some recommendations. Teachers and students liking to see more authentic assessments, which connects to the student choice, but also things that essentially an audience besides your teacher is going to see. Whether it's instead of an essay, writing an email to a former teacher, writing an email to an administrator, putting together a grant that a local business owner could see. Things like that, where your audience shifts from just, okay, I'm writing this and my teacher's going to look at it, to it being something that knowing that the stakes are a little higher, because someone else besides my teacher could look at it, but also then they have to think about different ways of writing and communicating, because they have different methods for different audiences. They have to think, what's my audience interested in? This business owner might have different interests than my teacher. What do I need to include in this that's going to fit that audience? Teachers wanting time to share and compare other assessments, just their common summative assessments, but other assessments as well. and teachers wanting to continue calibrating scoring of common assessments. And that's one thing we've talked about across the board, and our teachers wanting to take that time to, it takes work, you know, when you have those common assessments and when you come up with new things, you can't just jump into kind of comparing how are the students doing, what were your scores, what were my scores. You have to make sure those, my scores and your scores, collaborate. And so continually taking the time to collaborate the scoring before even getting into the comparisons.
I think that really gets to the heart of it, right? When you're doing that in your groups, talking about, you know, what did you see in really looking at student work and figuring out and supporting teachers to be collaborative and share the instructional practices that they use to get that result from a student. I think that just further strengthens what teachers are able to do and learn from one another. So I wanted to highlight
And it's probably
that.
most important, well, very important in English, where by nature it's such a subjective subject that there's not always a cut and dry right answer and multiple choice and things like that. And so it takes almost more work at times rather than potentially some other subjects to do that calibration of what is mastery, what is proficiency, what is marginal in terms of work. So some recommendations based on both the results from looking at the data and also the surveys, creating and revising assessments to provide those more authentic learning opportunities, and then providing team time, right? As you saw previously, teachers want time to do some things, to look at work, to revise the assessments, to have time. So providing time for teachers to analyze those common summative assessments and other work so that they can measure student achievement and growth, both over the course of the school year, so a teacher can look at their students' growth from the beginning of the year to the end, but also measure growth from vertical growth from one year to the next.
Speaking of that, we already have a date on the calendar of June 6th, where ELA teachers will be sitting down in 8th grade, including Kristen Shanley, and Ian will be sitting with Mary and Kelly to look at, okay, how did students do in 8th grade on the Smarter Balance Assessment, and what does that look like for students coming into 9th grade, so Ian and his department can be prepared to know what the students' ability levels are and what they need to plan for.
So this is sort of a summary of our, these were the trends we identified earlier, and our conclusions were that our goals would be in the area of curriculum to increase student choice in writing, offering a variety of styles and types. As Ian mentioned, increasing authenticity. So what that looks like, the last 2 summers we've done the Curriculum Writing Institute for grades 1 through 5. So grades 1 and 2, they've more or less been sort of like combining 2 units, like informative 1 and informative 2, so that the first unit is a briefer period of instruction and there's more hands-on and writing, producing more products, producing more authentic products. 3, 4, and 5 have been very successful at working at making the work products more authentic. So the 3rd graders have a unit on, so they've combined reading, writing, and social studies, or it could be reading, writing, and science in the future, but, so they have an inventors unit. So this was an research unit, and so what they do is they research an inventor, and then they produce different products that would be, this is my inventor, you know, and then they have sort of looks like a science fair, but it's an inventor fair. And that's been very, very well received. The kids are very engaged, very hot to do the work. They really work hard and they really learn a lot. And 4th grade has a similar unit where they combine the American West, their social studies unit, with the reading and the writing. So they're researching, they're reading to research to prepare for something that's real. They're a product that they're going to produce. And they had like I think it was a newspaper article or a blurb about going west, young man type of advertisement. But I mean, it's informational, like an infographic type of piece. And there's different iterations of that. But again, a lot of interest from the kids. They're like, oh, no two people's work product looks the same. It's very creative. There's a lot of, but all meet the same guidelines, all meet the same standards. And grade 5 has a unit where it's about tied into their social studies unit for the American Revolution. So they have to produce some type of newspaper article or other type of, whether it be a visual or graphic or whatever, the pros and cons, are you for the revolution guys, are you against the revolution guys, but all factual based. So they collect and redo their research for a purpose. And so when we say authentic, it means, it's about something that's real and meaningful to you, and not just we're all learning about spiders. Which we've done in the past, and in kindergarten it's all right, but as they get older. The second goal would be in curriculum, again, more opportunities for discussions. We're going to keep pursuing that regarding that vertical alignment. So we understand better what came before us and what came after. One of the things we didn't talk about as pointedly in assessment is we've been using the standards progressions as our rubrics. So we know what it looks like in kindergarten, first grade, all the way up. So we may have a rubric that if you're a fifth grader, that's your goal. And then the prior standards would show I'm there but not there yet, and then where you go from there. And this makes it very specific for the teacher and for the student to say, well, you can do this. And now the difference between that iteration of that particular standard here and this one more piece, your +1 is this. So we're not spending time going all the way back to the beginning. We're working on things that are around this, but that +1 piece that we're able to communicate to students more clearly about what's missing, what needs to be supplied. And so the more we study the progressions and that vertical alignment, just what's going from one place to the next, our instruction is also more efficient. And it's more effective because now we know exactly what you need to teach. We want to cover the whole waterfront. Another one is finding the balance between paper and digital. We know because we've been doing the research, as I said, we did the research on this. And the research does show, there was a meta-analysis of, it was really for K through 2, so it was a primary research study. But it's not going to surprise you to hear that younger children are distracted by the devices more so, right? So a lot of the time they're playing with the devices or pressing the button. And they even found that when adults are with a child who's reading on digital, the adult is tending to talk more about the device than about the story. So now they're very motivational though. It's not that there's something wrong with digital, it's just digital as your primary delivery is not recommended for the younger students. And digital, we all know digital is good and it's bad, right? We all know that, when you spend too much time on the screen, we're sitting there doing that, and it's not the best. So what we're looking for is at every grade level, at every age level, what's the right amount of digital to be interesting, informative, useful? It's a tool. Let's use the tool for the right way. Even at the middle school and high school, some things are better written down. The students actually report that they like writing notes. And studies show that writing out notes actually is helpful. So we're looking for finding the right way to use paper and the right setting to use digital.
I was going to say, older children are also distracted by this.
Well, we're all distracted.
And something that's, and you guys are, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but this has come up since we came up with this report, but definitely connects to this, is the use of ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah.
So that's something we're certainly going to have to navigate over the next couple of years as well when it comes to that very conversation.
Well, an authentic assessment.
Exactly.
Authentic
Right, kind of
instruction.
step one of fighting that is having those.
Yeah. And so again, with text, the libraries are pretty darn old now since when they were first, provided. When we went to a workshop, kind of a model where kids were reading more often. And we need to replace some of the worn out books. We need to increase some of the selections. Especially we want more nonfiction present. We want to try to get a 50-50 because you learn about the world through nonfiction. That is your academic reading. That's your academic language. And so it's just not good enough to read, fun, funny fiction, scholastic chapter books. It's just, they're not that smart. They're not going to make you that smart. So we have to be sure that we have a nice balance there as well. Also, one of the nice things about our students for full-day kindergarten was that our Lexiles went up across the board because children were learning to read earlier and they're reading harder books sooner, right? So our libraries were purchased at a time, not all of the libraries and not all of the books, but the inception of it, the Lexiles were a little lower. And so we need to adjust because we have students who are reading, they're showing us that they can handle higher Lexiles. And you're not going to grow if all your books are 500 Lexile, and how are you going to be a 900? It's not going to happen. We have to have those higher Lexiles in the classroom. The best way to attract a higher Lexile is to have nonfiction. They're more complex, sentence structure's more complex, the vocabulary is more complex. It'll give you a higher lexile, and we don't have to worry about content. That's a big part of that. So, student interest, that's something you chase around, but you know, there are topics and, so forth that the kids like. And then, you know, what's relevant to kids today, you know. Some of the books that people loved to read years ago, the Beverly Cleary is kind of like, she's like out right now, and was really interested. There's nothing wrong with her books, but the kids are just not drawn to it. So we're looking for things that spark their interest a little more. And of course, cultural responsiveness, so that all of the students, you know, they see everybody in the books when they're reading. And they experience a wide variety of cultures and ideas and high quality instruction to reach all learners. That overarches all of it. We are looking to improve our instruction so that students can do things on their own, that we don't help them too much, but they're scaffolding so that they can, you know, we can set the table, they have to pick up the fork, they have to work, but we have to make sure that they are able to do that. Responsive teaching is, I'm watching you, I'm listening to you, I see what you can do, I see what you can't do, I'm responding to you in real time. That's the best teaching, the teaching that you need right now. In particular, things like grammar and conventions. You never know when you should teach that. When are you going to teach reflexive pronouns? And what day of the year is the best day to teach it? You know, the minute you need it is the day you're going to listen to me. And the day you need it is not going to be the day you need it. So you have to have a skill set to be responsive in your teaching. And that's true for all teaching. And then challenging students. We want to be sure to always, you know, we don't want them to check out. We want the students to feel interested in school and to feel not frustrated, but that little bit of productive struggle, or that little, you know, a little bit too far, and I'm going to get there and I'm proud of myself.
Some of the sincere inquiry that this group did, and kind of saying, ooh, these are some of the areas that are just more difficult to get to, particularly with this last one, are actually influencing some of the thoughts about when we get to Curriculum Writing Institute, where are we giving teachers some opportunity to grapple with these parts of it, not just in English language arts, but across the board. So I give this group, I'll echo what Marlene said, a lot of credit on going, ooh, we've got some things that are going well, but there are some things within what's going well that we might be able to do a little bit better, because we're showing that we're not yet at all learners. So some of their inquiry into this and sincere, like, we've got some spots where we want this to be better. Some of those named here, those are influencing not just ELA for, like, well, these are probably true in multiple areas, and we can help teachers design a curriculum that has some of these things in mind a little bit more. So just to anchor that, not just the effect of kind of their own inquiry, but it had some legs beyond just ELA. Sorry, I didn't.
No? Okay. And there's one more, I think it's the professional development. So for professional development and for professional learning, honestly, we want to follow those goals that we set for the curriculum area, the text, resources and technology, the instructional strategies, and the assessment, because there are some new, wrinkles there in each one of those areas that we talked about. In the area of text and resources, for example, one of the things you do when you go to college is you don't just read one book and write a report. You read a bunch of resources, right? You might look at a map, you might listen to a video, it might be multimedia. We want our students to be able to think across text and not just within one text, like one resource that has all the answers. That's not the way that academics work and think. So we are, in our libraries, that's another thing that we want to develop, sets of texts, and like bins of books in the classroom, like a bin of oceans. We have that already, but more intentionally now than we have in the past. And in our curriculum, to have more articles, so that as the teacher is working on one piece of literature, they might have a few others, a couple of poems, maybe lyrics to a song, maybe again other types of graphic types, whatever it might be, a video. Some of the platforms that we have do a good job of helping us to cobble together some of that. And this way is another way that we can reach all levels of students, because you could then, within a text set, have higher lexiles, lower lexiles, stuff that has a little bit more access for students with IEPs, that sort of thing.
and
We
yeah.
got big goals, big goals.
That's awesome. Yeah, drastically different than I remember playing, so it's awesome. Thank you. So what's next?
If I could, so I sent you, I think it was last week, an article that came out of MIT. And I mean, it's just was produced, or it was published 3 weeks ago, so a little late for your presentation, but they are actually starting to look at the role of paper text in the development of reading. And it's starting to raise a lot of red flags about tech. And I would just love to share it with you, because I just,
If you could share it with that, I'd love to see it.
yeah.
Forward it to you guys.
It was a good one. And then, you know, in terms of, and I so appreciate the equalization, I guess, of nonfiction versus fiction. I guess the only place I push back is to say that I probably have learned more about the world through a good classic novel than in many respects, whether it's history or science fiction. So, you know, I just, I sometimes think this world gets so technical and so, I don't know, I'm just, for lack of a better word, non-romantic, you know, and the beauty of a good novel to develop the character and of the reader, but also open up worlds that they would never.
Well, my undergraduate degree was in English lit, so I have to.
So is mine, so we can chat.
But the early little cheesy paperback
Oh,
chapter
no,
books, you
yeah,
know, they're okay when you're learning to read, you know, but, there isn't a 100%, 50% balance, it's more like, you know, 20-80 in some places. We needed to be a little bit more balanced.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we've always done, we have always done with students is, you know, teachers have a variety of strategies where they'll have like a bingo card or a list or a contract, depending on how old you are, and say, okay, so now you've read some poetry, so now you know, what else are you gonna read, which box are you gonna color next, you're gonna read some nonfiction, you're gonna read about this topic, you know, to be a person who knows a lot.
yeah. It's
and
interesting.
reads a lot.
You just mentioned something, and it's not even related, but when I was teaching my 8th graders and we were doing prepositions, and I talked about contracts, and I said, you know, you get this preposition wrong, it'll cost your company billions. So make sure you start learning the meanings and the placement of your prepositions, and it, you know, like if Anne's gonna go work for that guy, I'm happy to come in and teach grammar, because I love teaching grammar, but it is,
One thing we didn't mention was we found a very nice grammar and conventions resource that we learned very much. We've been looking for a few years, and there are lots of things that are on platforms, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something where we're showing it to you in a piece of, you know, a couple of sentences from a real text, from a real novel
Right.
or a real book. And then what do you notice? How does this or that work, right? And then look at another one, and then there's a now you try it. And now the students produce that, and they use series and a comma, or they use semicolon, or they use, you know, gerunds, whatever you want. But, we had, the one resource is for grades 1 through 6, and then, or 1 through 5, and what's interesting is Dot has found companion ones, same people, 6, 7, and 8. So we're going to be vertically articulating through that process. And it's a really, I'm learning it because I'm using it, and that's good instruction, because you only know something if you can use it. That's the standard for vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
I know this word. How do I know you know this word? You can either use it when you talk or you write.
right.
And so, yeah.
And then one last question, depending on the waiver, what is Right to Read gonna do for all of this?
Oh, with this?
So the
So-
waiver, we have learned that between this week and June, they will be contacting us. We will have 30-minute meetings in which they can ask us questions and get some clarifications about the waiver. They won't be making any decisions prior to, we don't have to implement anything prior to June, I'm sorry, the school year 2025. So to be continued. What has happened here is that through the process, as we've talked about, I think at the last meeting, was updating some of our primary grade assessments. So had a number of meetings about that and looking towards next year, because we will do that next year regardless. We know that we need to update our assessments, and this gave us, well, plus the requirement of certain assessments is making us change.
I think, wasn't it earlier this year that a group of us came to the board and presented on that bridge module? So we had already been in a place where we were updating our practice for instructional phonics and phonemic awareness, bolstering it so that our decoding and our encoding, would intersect more. And so that would tie into the curriculum, it ties into our instructional strategies. We have that part of the day where teachers in K through 3 have that part of the day every day where they go through a series of, just a series of activities where, like learning activities where they're doing phonemic awareness and then they're applying it with spelling and reading and so forth. But we talked about that. So it's already in place and it didn't do anything to this, it's just sort of like, okay, that's another wrinkle of this. It's not, that doesn't have anything to do so much with middle school and high school because that's
Right.
something we must do, but they are going to be beneficiaries of it.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue with 4th, 5th, and 6th anyway, because some students will always need to work more on the decoding or on the stuff. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, it is, thank you. Very good.
That was an 8.
Okay, well, that is the last, is there anything we should be asking that you want us to ask?
They were very thorough.
Thank you.
For your kind attention.
Thank you.
I
Sure.
appreciate people learning about what we do on it.
All right, well, that was the last item on the agenda, so, Ian.
Oh, sure. I move to adjourn.
Second.
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.